All right. Oops, I moved. Good afternoon, everybody. Hello. It's running a couple minutes behind, but let's go ahead and get this public health party started. Thank you all for being here. My name is Angela Hobson. I have the honor of serving as the Associate Dean for Public Health here at the Brown School and welcoming all of you to our last installment of Public Health Speaker Series for this academic year. So thank you all so much for being here. Before we begin, I wanted to thank our partners, our university partners, the Environmental Studies and the WashU Climate Change Program for co-sponsoring this. We are also co-sponsored by the Provost's Office and the Here and Next Strategic Plan. And before I have the honor of introducing our speaker for today, we're going to hear a little bit more about Here and Next from Dr. Mary McKay, who is our beloved former dean of the Brown School here and also serves as the vice provost for interdisciplinary initiatives, which kind of means that she is really overseeing everything that we are doing for strategic planning here at the university. So with that, I'm going to welcome Mary up here to talk to us about Here and Next.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? So you have an amazing speaker today, so I'm not going to really stand in the way except to say thank you, Angela, for introducing me. And unbelievable that this is the last in the series for the academic year. And so I hope it has flown by and has been incredibly enriching for all of you. So I'm just going to make a few comments about why this particular speaker and this lecture connects to our university's strategic plan, which, because I see so many people that I've spoken to in the past, you know that our university's strategic plan is called Here and Next. This particular vision statement is incredibly important to guide the work that we are doing around implementation planning at the university. So the ambitions of WashU to mobilize its research, its education, its patient care, to establish our university as well as our region as a global hub for transformative solutions to the deepest societal challenges. What I think is kind of interesting about this slide, and I present it often, is get a look at the ivory tower next to this action-oriented vision, right? So universities, often referred to as ivory towers, we create knowledge, but then do we have the infrastructure? Do we have the commitments to actually apply that knowledge to create new solutions? And so for somebody like me who started my WashU career here at the Brown School in social work and public health and social policy, to see this action orientation that we want to really do create evidence-informed new solutions, not only for our region, but in partnership across the nation and globe, means a lot to me. It's a serious commitment of our university. So I'm an academic. I could talk the entire time about our strategic plan. Thank goodness not everybody on the Here and Next team are academics. There's also communication experts. So this is the whole plan on one slide. And so if you've seen this before, you know that there's a research pillar, a people pillar, a community pillar as part of this plan, and that in fact, you as our speaker touch many aspects of the strategic plan of WashU. And so I'm super happy that you're going to actually bring some of these green circles together in one lecture. Also pay attention to the guiding principles. You are going to, I think I can anticipate based on our conversation last night at dinner, an equity-centered lecture and certainly equity, diversity, inclusion, incredibly important, as well as community impact. So you touch both value principles as well as some of the strategic priority areas today. So in particular, this notion around community impact, how you take scholarship in public health, environmental research, and how you actually make it matter in the lives of people is incredibly important for the university's strategic plan, which is why actually you're probably the perfect speaker to end this series with. So I just want to say a couple of ways that you touch public health. You care about thriving. of populations. And I think that that's really when you center health equity at the center of public health, you think about not only incrementally changing the burden that populations experience, but eliminating those disparities. And I think that that's incredibly important. And I think you'll hear some of that in the talk today. I also came from a planning meeting just this morning, if Laura Inati is still here, and Dan Jamar, there you are. Where Dan, you and Laura kind of challenged our colleagues to think about environmental research as bringing our disciplines together, thinking about collaboration from the Brown School and McKelvey and our other units across campus to really make a difference, to make this environment supportive of people thriving, as opposed to, adding additional burdens and threats. And then certainly our community pillar, we're doing a lot of work around what are the actual structures and the much deeper institutional work that we need to do to be really impactful collaborative partners in our region. So with that, I want to say thank you to all of you for coming. I guess I want to look in some camera or other and say thank you, or all of you, for being online, and for our speaker that is connecting so much of where we're headed as a university in one lecture. So with that, Angela, come on up and introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. McKay. And yes, I should note, I wanted to welcome all of you that are joining online too. I know we usually have quite a few folks joining online, and even though I can't see you right now, I'm thankful that you are here. So I would like to introduce our guest for today, Dr. Sacoby Wilson. He's here to talk to us about bending the arc towards justice, transforming public health through community-engaged research and practice. Dr. Wilson is a professor with the Maryland Institute for Applied Environmental Health and the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics, although he will tell us he is not an epidemiologist. At University of Maryland College Park School of Public Health, where he also directs the Center for Community Engagement, Environmental Justice, and Health. He has over 20 years of exposure science, environmental justice, environmental health, disparities, community-based participatory research, water quality analysis, air pollution studies, built environment, industrial animal production, climate change, community resilience, and sustainability work. So he's kind of done it all. So we're really happy to have him here. He works primarily in partnership with community-based organizations to study and address environmental justice and health issues and translate research to action. So without further ado, please help me welcome Dr. Sacoby Wilson. Let's see. Yeah. Yes, about 45. Yep.
Thank you. So thanks for this great introduction, Dr. Hobson, and really excited to be here. So my name is Sacoby. I'm from Mississippi, and you kind of ground y'all in talking about justice. As you know, right now my home state is going through a water crisis in Jackson. I have family. I'm from Vicksburg, but I have family who live in Jackson, and so when I bring it up because you have these issues of racism, right? And we think in Jackson, like, why you're bringing up the term racism, think about what's happening. You have a city that's 80% Black, a capital city is 80% Black that does not have water. As a kid from Vicksburg, the infrastructure in Jackson have been eroding since I was a child in the 80s. So think about the disinvestment and divestment over multiple decades, right? And we talk about, apartheid in South Africa that's no longer there, but we exported apartheid from our country to South Africa. Like places, Mississippi. Those, Nina Simone, she has a song called Mississippi. I'm not gonna say the rest of it, it's a bad word. But, Mississippi is an example of these issues, the intersection of racism, right? Racism, a public health issue. We're talking about this pandemic that we're in with coronavirus, right? It's actually a syndemic. A syndemic is multiple pandemics at one time. We have a pandemic of racism, a pandemic of environmental injustice, a pandemic of climate change, a pandemic of economic apartheid, right? Then you get the coronavirus for many communities. So we're going to address these issues around, bending that arc towards justice. We have to talk about racism. We have to talk about environmental justice in the U.S. context, but also the global movement for environmental justice. For the students out there, and I did this in the class yesterday, if you go to CEEJH Medium, you'll see that I wrote a blog on environmental slavery. It's like, what is that? Environmental slavery in the U.S. We also wrote a blog on environmental slavery globally. So these issues are not just a U.S. issue. These are issues around the world. But if you think about this work, right, and I'm an environmental justice researcher, I'm an environmental justice scholar, I'm an environmental justice advocate. For me, Du Bois is the great-grandfather of the environmental justice movement. You have Dr. King is a grandfather, and not let me forget the mothers of the EJ movement, because remember last month was Women's History Month. So you have many folks like Vernice Miller Travis, Peggy Shepard, Dolly Burwell, for those of you know the PCB landfill fight in Warren County, right? Those mothers of the environmental movement. But I want to highlight Dr. King real quick. What was yesterday? 55th year, right? 55th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. King yesterday. And you see, think about Dr. King, like, why would he be classified? Why would I call him the grandfather of the EJ movement? Because he was in Memphis working with the sanitation workers who had been mistreated, who had been dumped on, who were basically walking around with waste on their bodies. They were treated less than human. Look at the sign, I am a man, recognize my humanity. So you think about environmental injustice, people have been dehumanized, right? Communities have been dehumanized. But at the same time, they've been commodified and decommodified. The land is cheap, but you're good enough to be dumped on, right? Because of, capitalism, right? Because of, the need for money. Racial capitalism is another term we like to use. So you have some communities who are being used as dumping grounds, used as sacrifice zones. So we think about the environment, and, when I was a kid, and it's one of my little jokes, when the word environment pops in my head, I think about a polar bear with a Coca-Cola. That's really good marketing, folks. But for me, when we think about environmental justice, it's about what we live, what we work, what we play, what we pray, what we learn. Let me say it slower, because I'm from Mississippi. We talk fast. We don't. I talk fast. Slow it down for you. It's about what we live, what we work, what we play, what we pray, what we learn. So you think about the environmental justice movement, it's about understanding how some communities are overburdened by hazards, right? Locally wanted LULUs, right? Locally wanted land uses. And what does that mean for health? And you think about health equity was mentioned previously. We're talking about the social determinants of health. We're talking about the environmental determinants of health. So we're going to address these root causes of health inequities. One of those root causes is racism. You think about, again, the PC landfill fight that's a picture in this photo. You had people who laid across the ground to stop these trucks with PCB-laden dirt from coming into Warren County, a primarily Black community, low-income community, right? Dr. Bullett's work in Texas and Houston saw that a lot of the landfills built in Houston were primarily built in communities of color. You think about environmental justice, you have the EPA's definition, and I'm not a big fan of that definition. It doesn't take into account racism, doesn't take into account history, doesn't take into account segregation and redlining, right? Doesn't take into account Jim Crow 1.0 or Jim Crow 2.0 that we're experiencing right now. So, the new definition that's kind of redefining of it, a just treatment and meaningful involvement of people regardless of race, color, origin, income, right, ability. So you hear DEI issues, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion in that definition. And making sure communities' voices are heard. For those of you who understand the environmental justice work, we talk a lot about representative justice. So that's making sure that people are most impacted, their voices are heard in the process. You also have procedural justice, making sure, as we talked about in class yesterday, I believe, all they had to do with the Flint water crisis is comply with the lead and copper rule, right? So differential implementation of our rules and regulations, differential compliance. You also have distributional justice that makes you have a fair distribution of the harms, which we don't want everybody to get pollution, right? It's not like Oprah Winfrey. You get a landfill, and you get a landfill. You get a petrochemical operation. You get a 1-2. Once you get a pipeline, you get a pipeline. You get a hog farm. You get a hog farm. It's the benefits, though. Making sure that people get the benefits of having access to natural resources, the ecological goods and services that they provide. And so that's one definition. I like this definition better. This is a definition by Dr. Bunyan Bryant, who's a professor emeritus at the University of Michigan. The first EJ conference, I believe, was held at Michigan in 1992 or 4. If it was Jeopardy, I'm probably wrong, but it's in the early 90s. So what you see in this definition is the social terms of health. People can realize the full potential while experiencing isms, decent paying and safe jobs, quality schools and recreation, right? All that social terms of health. Hey, public health folks in the room, out there in the webosphere, avatars out there, decent housing and adequate healthcare. All that is social determinants of health. Communities free of violence, drugs, and poverty. So again, the EJ framework is a very holistic framework. And you think about, I talked to one of the classes yesterday, and it's a great class. They're talking about environmental racism. We talk about structural racism. I like to use the term structured. It's not by accident. So you think about environmental racism, how for some reason, some communities, due to their race and ethnicity, tend to have these hazards. And Dr. Bullard, who's been called by some of the father EJ movement, calls it complexion for protection. Some folks have it, some folks don't. So you have the not in my backyard phenomenon, and you have another phenomenon he came up with called PIBBY, put in blacks' backyards. Okay, maybe not heard of them before. But this term environmental racism was coined by Dr. Chavis in the fight in Warren County against the landfill, the PCB landfill. Now, when I think about, EJ, and, every academic wants to put their own spin on the framework. We know we do, because we have the publish or perish, right? We're going to move y'all from that. We're going to change the culture of academia, okay? Not about publish or perish, but I'll get to that point later. So the first leg of the EJ stool is this sort of classic frame and the differential burden of hazards, right? Incinerators, chemical plants, petrochemical operations, hog farms, chicken farms, et cetera. And then these same communities have a high concentration of psychosocial stressors. So again, you get back to the social social health. And then these communities may not have access to salutogenic or health promoting infrastructure. So you heard about food swamps and food deserts. Symptoms of the problem, the larger problem is food apartheid. Communities may not have access to nature. There's a nature gap. Blacks have 3 times less access to nature compared to their white counterparts. Low income folks have 3 times less access to nature compared to their wealthier counterparts. So what does it mean when you have access to nature? We came from Mother Earth, right? We will go back to Mother Earth. We are connected to the land. So it's important for us to have access to nature, have access to clean rivers and streams. What about folks here in the St. Louis area? Do they have access to clean urban rivers and streams? Are people subsistence fishing? Are they eating those fish? Are those fish safe to eat? So this is a serious issue when you think about public health. So from a science perspective, if you think about communities that are impacted by environmental injustice, I mean, slow down a little bit because I have way too many slides. I told Dr. Hobson. So I'm gonna slow down some. So science perspective, we're talking about the cumulative impacts. So think about the cumulative impacts of being exposed to multiple chemical and non-chemical stressors. So if you have a community that's living near a highway, for example, they've been exposed to combustion byproducts, right? So when we burn diesel, when we burn gasoline, we're creating particulate matter, we're creating nitrogen dioxide, we're creating sulfur dioxide, we're creating polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs. We may have metals in the air. We may be also creating volatile organic compounds, VOCs. So think about when you drive your car through a neighborhood, particularly a neighborhood that has no trees, so they have no lungs to absorb those contaminants, right? You're leaving poison in that neighborhood. You're dumping toxicants in that neighborhood. Think about a pregnant mother who may be living in a home that has lead. Y'all know what lead does. Lead bioaccumulates, right? Accumulates in bone. And then she's pregnant, that lead gets re-released. So that developing fetus has been exposed to lead. Then she goes outside and breathes particulate matter, breathes NO2, breathes SO2, breathes VOCs. Think about the cumulative impacts of that. And that's just chemical stressors. Go back into the home and you got mold, mildew, allergens, right? Biological stressors. You have a busy highway, noise pollution, physical stressor, right? No trees again. You got a lot of concrete and asphalt, heat, right? A physical stressor. And then you have the psychosocial stressors of being maybe poor, not having health care, being underinsured, being underemployed, right? Or maybe having some crime or violence in a community. Think about the toxic load that people experience, the toxic stress that folks experience, being poisoned, and then those other toxics that they deal with. What does it do? It wears people down. It gets internalized. Think about, for those of you in toxicology, when you are exposed to a pollutant, your body goes through a process of trying to detoxify, intoxify, right? You create metabolites, and you may store in your lipid tissue, your bones, right? And then again, she's pregnant, it impacts the development of that baby. So you have developmental effects, particularly have reproductive effects. She could have asthma. Her mother, who's in the house, could be exposed to multiple mildew allergens and have her own health effects. That's when we talk about the cumulative impacts. So this is not something that's an academic exercise. These are real people every day being poisoned, who are surviving in toxic environments. So we have to have science that reflects that situation, science that can keep up with these burden issues that people are dealing with, science that can understand the mechanisms, right? But science that really gets at disparities, but the science that really understands the root causes that drive these issues. I didn't really have that on the slide, but I just want to add to that. Okay? So these burden disparities lead to exposure disparities, can lead to health disparities. So when you live in a community with a lot of these stresses, right, you can have different exposure to things like lead. And we didn't talk about lead the other day, and I'm make sure I don't forget lead. Think about children in America, right? Someone famously said, they want to put America first. How are you going to put America first and put your kids first? You heard what I said? How are you going to put America first and put your kids first? Think about, again, children, the blood-brain barrier, and how things can transfer over like lead and mercury, right? And the cognitive deficits that occur for children exposed to lead. Think of how many kids to cap on their potential, generations of children. That's a failure of public health, but it's a major EJ issue. But then you expose to other things beyond lead, right? And they can lead to adverse health outcomes, like, birth defects, increased infant mortality. So you heard that your zip code is a more important genetic code. Place matters, context matters, right? And so I'm not going to go into great detail on this slide, because again, I only have about probably 30 minutes now, right, Dr. Hobson? Something like that. Okay, keep me on time. So you just want to really understand these processes and how, when you think about environmental injustice and how you build healthy cities, healthy communities, in the US context, you have to understand history. You have to understand the role of segregation. You have to understand that inequities in planning, zoning, development have led to many of the issues that we're dealing with. Think about, for those of you who are familiar with the National Highway Defense Act of 1954, where a lot of highways and byways were built on purpose through Black and brown communities, right? And so you go from Tulsa to Durham to Charlotte, to DC to LA to Baltimore, Detroit, anywhere across the country, we have an urban city, right? Which makes sense. I said urban city. It is urban city, right? You're going to see this kind of breakdown and situation where these communities have been sort of destroyed in some ways, right? You have a highway that splits them, and then the fabric of the community has been destroyed. And then we're dumping, again, toxicants every day when we're driving our cars, or we have buses or big trucks, construction vehicles, right? So one of the points I'll make, and I'll go to the next slide, I used the term salutogenesis before. In the work that you do on this campus and the work you're doing as relates to sustainability, I think having a salutogenesis framework makes sense. Salutogenesis is a term coined by Antonovsky in the 60s. And it's about how do you promote health, well-being, and quality of life across all dimensions of the environment. So the built environment, the natural environment, political, economic, social environment, and the spiritual environment. How do you build resiliency? So salutogenesis is a really important, I think, process for us to think about as we build and maintain our cities, as we try to build and maintain healthy community ecosystems. So salutogens would be grocery stores, green space, pathogens. You say, Dr. Wilson, what's a pathogen got to do with this? I'm not talking about viruses, but think about communities as living, breathing organisms, those things that make our communities unhealthy. So you see it all the time, folks. Clusters of fast food restaurants, then clustered in the same location, payday lenders, quick loan facilities, right? Pawn shops, right? Those things are indicators of unhealthiness in the community. So we want to make sure our communities are going to salutogenesis, right? Salutogenic infrastructure. and not pathogenic infrastructure. So we have communities who are dealing with sacrifice zones. We have folks who live in riskscapes, and this can drive health inequities. That picture, what is that? Okay, that picture's a random photo. It's not a bad photo, but it's not the photo I had in mind. But that's a photo of, you see the, and it's actually even really shrunk, but that's not the picture I want to see. But that's one of my mentors, Dr. Steve Wing. We were talking about Dr. Wing last night. He passed away in 2016. But I'll talk more about his work and when we get to what can we do. But we call him the people's professor. So we're talking about community engagement. How, as faculty on this campus, how can you really uplift doing community engaged research? And without him, and maybe that's why the slide's in there, without him, I wouldn't be on this stage today. Okay, so I just want to give him some love and a shout out. So what can we do? We have to integrate the 17 principles of environmental justice. From those principles are codified in 1991. And you think about the work on this campus around sustainability. Look at principle 1, sacredness of Mother Earth. Principle 2, demands that public policy be based on mutual respect and justice for all peoples. That's that representative justice. Principle 3, ethical, balanced, and responsible use of land and renewable resources. That's sustainability, y'all. Principle 4, though, being against nuclear testing. Okay, there's other principles. Affirms the fundamental right to political, economic, cultural, and environmental self-determination. Right. You also have these principles around, public health, principles to protect workers. So this framework is a holistic framework. Integrate these principles into your curriculum. Integrate these principles into how you operate your university. Integrate these principles. You talk about DEI, let's use JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. I love JEDI. I'm a Star Wars fan. So let's do the JEDI approach. So bring this into your JEDI framework. Now, my center at Maryland, we focus a lot on what I can say is an empowerment science and liberation science. I'll define those things. So empowerment science is not e-empowerment. I had a colleague, one was on the board of Community Campus Partnership for Health. She said, Sacoby, you cannot give me power. You can help me connect to the power I already have. Help me build power, right? Help me grow power. Help me collect to my agency. Help me expand my community's agency. That's empowerment. Empowerment, y'all. It's within us already. How do we grow it? How do we build it, right? How do we maintain it? Power, right? Power. I was at another meeting on Sunday. I said power. I told it 10 times. So I got everybody, hyped up. Power. I'm not gonna have y'all do that right now. But you gotta have power, right? And you have to have hope with that power. Hope with that power. Now, when it comes to liberation science, I threw a term in there real quickly, environmental slavery. I didn't define it. So I think environmental racism is too nice of a term, y'all. I think environmental classism, too nice of a term. It's so being dumped on based on your income, right? Environmental slavery talks about how some communities get used and trapped because of their lack of power. They've been marginalized, invisibilized. Their voices have been stolen from them, okay? And so it becomes like environmental apartheid. You see communities that become sacrifice zones, right? And I used that term before, but it's really about they just get trapped and it becomes intergenerational. And they're being used to host these land uses. They're being used to internalize the pollutants, right? Individually, population-wise, and their communities being used as a dumping ground for others who may have so just like this whole research on some groups due to their race and ethnicity have a pollution advantage, and some groups due to their race and ethnicity have a pollution disadvantage. And you think about that globally in the context of climate change. Western nations, like where we are, burning lots of fossil fuels, creating a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, but then the LMICs, low and middle income countries, right? They're disproportionately impacted. So the ones that producing less of the greenhouse gas emissions are impacted more about it. That's when I talked about that blog about environmental slavery. Check it out. What's happening with farmers around the world who've been exploited, or indigenous brothers and sisters around the world who've been exploited, right? So environmental slavery is really about capturing the true experiences of some folks, generation after generation, who continues to be dumped on, and you have differential harms and differential benefits. Now, one of the things that we're doing through my center, and we're trying to get to this liberation science, is liberating folks from environmental oppression, liberating folks from environmental apartheid, liberating them from environmental slavery. We recently were funded by Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to start this, our Mid-Atlantic Climate Action Hub. So the idea is we want to engage communities who are doing the work around climate change and climate justice and help build capacity. So using this hub approach. So we're working with community partners in the Mid-Atlantic to really help them push for policy change and really be able to integrate equity and justice into their climate work and making sure, and I want y'all to take a lot of points from this presentation. I know I'm talking fast, I'm a fast talker, I try to slow down a little bit, but equity and justice when it comes to climate change. You may not believe in climate change, but believes in you if you're poor, if you're Black, if you're Hispanic, right? If you're indigenous, if you don't have health insurance, if you don't have health care, you live in a hazard, sacrifice zone, you have underlying health issues, because you have these underlying vulnerabilities that make you more at risk. So all of us are at risk from climate change, regardless of perturbation, but who's most impacted by forest fires? Who's most impacted by flooding? Who's most impacted by tornadoes? Who's most impacted by hurricanes? What people have a harder time of bouncing back, right? Remember Katrina hit New Orleans, on August 29th, 2005? And y'all were looking at TV, you were probably saying, why did people get out? New Orleans has a high concentration of people who are poor. So if you don't have August 29th, they probably haven't been paid yet, right? If you're poor, they probably have money in their savings account. If you're poor, guess what they also didn't have? They didn't have a car. So how are people going to escape out of harm's way when they had those underlying vulnerabilities? And then, as you know, 60 years later, Hurricane Ida hit New Orleans. And it also, it hit New Jersey, as you saw from the TV, hit New York, and we had people who lost their lives in basement apartments. So we have to really understand the differential vulnerability that drives differential risk and differential climate impacts. And so I'm going to skip this slide, but we're doing a lot of work through my center to really focus on climate justice and environmental justice, and again, uplifting communities. And how do we uplift communities? So this slide is our community engagement continuum slide. So as you move from left to right, community involvement increases, impact increases, trust increases, and communication increases. Think about working with communities, everyone. You like said, Dr. Wilson, how do we work with communities? Well, think about the relationships you have that are really great relationships. The same ingredients that you have those great relationships are what the relationships you need to have to create the foundation of good partnerships. And think about maybe the bad relationships you have. Why they don't work? It's the reason because you maybe not have good communication. You don't have good openness, right? So think about this work, when you're doing communication research, you got to have trust, you got to have good communication, you got to have openness, you got to have a lot of Aretha Franklin. Y'all get that? What's the song? Respect, right? You got to value people, okay? So a lot of our work, we may do outreach where we're doing we have a meeting and we're giving out flyers. It's one directional. There's really no true learning. There's no co-learning. Consultation, you guys more bi-directional. You have better communication. You start engaging the community. Consultation or involvement is maybe when you have a community advisory board, right? Now, for me, the ones I do a lot of, but you can't jump to them. You got to kind of go through this phased approach, this stepwise approach, participatory research, and also community-driven research. And I'll talk more about those. But I used to be on the board of CCPH, Community Campus Partnership for Health. And so you got to think about partnerships again. If you want to engage communities, you got to try to build good partnerships. You got to have agreed upon mission and values, right? So how y'all integrate that into your strategic plan at this university, in the Brown School, right? You got to, again, have that respect and genuine and commitment to change. You got to also not have a deficit model. I was at a presentation over the last couple of weeks, and we talked about the doom and gloom around climate change. Some of y'all younger folks in here have climate anxiety because we've done a great job of saying the world's going to end. Well, the communities I work in every day with environmental injustices, they're already dealing with doom and gloom, y'all. So we got to do more of a strengths-based approach, an asset-based approach to addressing these issues. And we want to make sure that we're leveraging resources. So we want to make sure all partners are engaged in decision-making. Remember I said representative justice. We want to make sure the voice of those the most impacted are heard in these plans. So your strategic plan, are you engaging with community groups in the St. Louis area? Are you engaging with community partners in the state? They should be helping to inform your strategic plan, and it should be an iterative process. And so you want to have those feedback loops. You want to focus on benefits, right? And so, the key ingredients, as I've already said, you want to, have trust and honesty and transparency. You want to make sure that people's time is valued, right? Folks can't just be volunteers. And you want to make sure you're doing peer mentoring, peer learning. That's going to be important, sharing best practices and lessons learned. So this is something y'all can, go online to look up at the CCPH website. Now, going back to participatory, and that's more bidirectional, CBPR is making sure the community is engaged in all stages of the research process. But again, when you think about the CBPR framework, that ethos can be applied to any activity that you have in the Brown School or you have on your campus. So whether it be research, whether it be practice, whether it be policy, whether it be your workforce development, how y'all do contracting, community should be engaged in all stages of the process. Now, getting back to the research perspective, that means developing the research questions. That means developing the study design. Okay, that means data collection. That means data analysis. Sometimes it depends on what type of project it is, right? Dissemination and translating into action. So when community-based participatory research, local knowledge is valued. Folks who deal with the issues every day, they're the contextual experts. Dr. McLean, one of my mentors that I mentioned before, she said, Sacoby, community folks are true subject matter experts. Okay, you want to make sure that you have power. There's inequities in power between our universities and community-based groups, right? So we got to focus on that. And then I really want all of us to do, I'm not saying you're not doing a great job of this, but when you're working with people, they're not objects, they're not subjects. Use of the term subject is actually, in my opinion, invisibilizes folks. It otherizes people. And then also, I know I'm a great talker, I know a lot of stuff, but I know a lot about a little bit. That's what I am. So move from being the expert to more of a facilitator, a translator, a catalyst. That's important in this work. And so, I've already kind of covered these things. I'll skip forward, but just CBPR is a really good framework that you can integrate into your work. But again, not just into your research, but also into your teaching, okay, into the curriculum, into all aspects of how this university engages with the greater St. Louis area, engages with the folks across the state, and also in the larger region. Now, one of the things I really like to highlight is how in science, and we have to change the culture of science. So always like to highlight Boyer's 5 dimensions of science. In academia, we overemphasize inquiry, and that's knowledge production, but we really have to focus more on integration, multidisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, teaching, engagement, and application. And I like to say, if you don't do all 5 dimensions of science, and this may be a little harsh for folks, you're doing incomplete science. Then you say, Dr. Wilson, I've been trained to do that. Okay, that's change the programs. That's improve our curriculum. And then you say, well, Dr. Wilson, I don't want to do that. That's not a good thing to say, but I get it. And you say, Dr. Wilson, well, what about, my job is to publish. That's what you've been trained to do. But to me, and someone's already heard this, and I'll say it again, in the great words of Yoda, again, Star Wars reference, peer-reviewed publications does not science communication make. Okay? Thanks for the laughs. So the whole idea is, if you're going to get this work out to the people are not looking at your journals. They're not reading your articles. That policymaker is not going to read your article. Those articles get dusted. That's for us. That's really about tenure, promotion, status, and acclaim. But if you want to be about change, not just in your pocket, but change for the people, you got to do other types of science communication. So for me, if you look at peer-reviewed publications and science communication in general, look at low impact and high impact. For me, peer-reviewed publications are actually low impact. Doing blogs and white papers and briefs, social media, talking, and actually, this is a novel concept. Go talk directly to the policymaker, right? So some of the work that we do in Maryland, we actually meet with the state agency heads of DNR, heads of MDE. They're trying to schedule a meeting with the Department of Natural Resources head. We work on commissions. We work on legislation. We work directly with our legislators on bills. That's what we should be doing more of. You don't need a peer-reviewed publication. You just have to take the knowledge you already have and be able to share that knowledge with them and be an advocate, be an active agent of change so they can make sure that information is integrated into the policy. So when you're doing this work, you may say, Dr. Wilson, but I don't know where to start. What are the issues? What are the impacts? What's your why? And you can say, well, Dr. Wilson, my why is to get published. I'm trying to get y'all away from that. But we have to change, again, for those of you in the audience who are associate deans and other levels, that's modified attention promotion guidelines to make sure that all forms of science communication are valued and that the things that are very impactful are actually more valued than publications. I know that's a big change, but I think we can do it, right? What are the opportunities? What are the benefits? How to lead the partnerships in any area of research you want to work in? You want to meet people where they are. Make it proximal, make it everyday, make it pocketbook. So connect to people about food, faith, family, health, and jobs. That's the stuff that's important. So citizen science is another, way we can get people engaged in science. It's really the democratization of science. We're all scientists, and I'm gonna say this to y'all, and I'm gonna whisper it to you. You don't have to have a PhD to be a scientist. So I think that credentialing, you think when we apply for federal funding, it's actually biased to those who actually have PhDs. Some federal grants, you're required to have a PhD. So it's about the scientific method and how we're using science. So for me, let's do more, action-oriented science. Let's do more applied science. Let's move away from extractive science. Let's move away from a colonial science. Let's move away from science that really exploits people's pain, right? And let's move to science that's more justice-focused, community-centered, right? Solutions-oriented. It's about change for the people. It's about power. It's about power. It's about power. Okay, y'all get the point, power. Okay, and so I think that's an important thing that this university has an opportunity to do, to really bring in, do science that really changes lives, okay? So a few examples, I know I'm getting low on time. Few examples, getting very low on time. So for the students in the room, I want to give you a couple examples of things that I worked on in my career. When I was a grad student at UNC Chapel Hill, I worked with a group called the West End Revitalization Association. And the reason why I bring it up real quickly is you don't have to wait till you graduate to have an impact. So these are communities that were post-slavery Black neighborhoods that didn't have access to sewer and water infrastructure. Many of you may be doing work internationally on wash issues, people doing open defecation, not having access to sewer, good hygiene. They were on septic tanks on well water. They want to have a highway built through their community. They developed this framework called the community owner managed research approach. And really about, it's really about science for compliance, everybody. Not just collecting data, but getting science for compliance. And so we saw high rates of septic system failure. This is really where, if you go back to the continuum, I talked about participatory and community-driven, this is community-driven research. Community didn't need us, but we were partners. And so we were able to do this work and see these issues, right? And then we were able to, my slides are messing up here. Interesting. My slides they're overlapping, so you're gonna see some weird stuff. Okay, I see why I saw Dr. Wing earlier than I was supposed to. So we were able to use this research to really stop this bypass from being built. And it's a weird slide. And you see me with that's a flow sensor in the back, but it shouldn't be there. I think my file got corrupted, Dr. Hobson. But it is citizen science. It's just one is water quality and then the air quality, but that should be on different slides. But we really engaged communities. We were able to get the highway delayed. That's weird. And we were able to get them first-time installation of sewer and water infrastructure. So these are what we call pre-New Deal communities. And so the roads weren't paved. They didn't have sewer and water. So I was able to do this as a grad student. So that's just an example I wanted to show. We also have a project where we're looking at disasters in the Carolinas. And so how you can bring in community engagement and disaster work. How can you, really build people's resilience? So we're doing a lot of community science methods, right? Using PPGIS, we're using photo voice. We're doing other types of ground truthing methods. So just want to highlight, this is another example. Think about what's happening in Ohio and how you can bring in CBPR, or what we like to call community-based participatory services in support of communities who are impacted by disasters, whether it be climate-related disasters or technological disasters. Another opportunity to do this work is with stormwater. We know because of climate change, there's more stormwater inputs and impacts. So how can you, in urban settings like in St. Louis, when you have places that flood, I heard that y'all had flooding was a year ago, how can you engage communities who are going to be flooded time and time again because they have because of the impervious surfaces, there's nowhere for their water to go. So how can you bring in green infrastructure as a solution, but making sure that's community driven so you get buy-in? So that's something that y'all should be doing at this university. And students, y'all can do that now. You don't have to wait again till you graduate to be a part of that change. So we're bringing in green infrastructure. And I just want to highlight that. Wow, another slide that's out of order. So particulate matter is a very important pollutant that I think when you think about my work, we do a lot of work around air quality monitoring. And this slide is really not showing that well. It's weird. So my slides have been corrupted. Yikes. So basically what I wanted to highlight is when you think about hyperlocal air quality monitoring, PM is a major pollutant of concern, and also black carbon is a major pollutant of concern. And so one of the things when you think about communities that are impacted by, remember I talked about cumulative impacts, we want to make sure we're measuring those things so we can do community science, basically train residents to be community scientists to collect their own data. And when you think about air pollution impacts people across their whole life course. And so that's why when you think about how folks experience environmental injustices, one of the main ways they experience that is through air pollution. So how can we use the infrastructure that's out there? How can you use the infrastructure on campus in your courses to really help folks collect data on their air pollution issues and use that data for action? And one of the things that we do in this work, we really bring the community in the project organization, the study implementation, and project completion. So we develop MOUs between our community partners and other partners. We have a project right now with the Maryland Department of Environment where we're going to be doing air quality monitoring in Cheverly, Maryland, in Baltimore City, and also in Baltimore County. We have a project with one of our colleagues in Philadelphia. They also have funding through EPA, the ARA funding. You may know about that funding where groups got $500,000 to do air quality monitoring. This all is community-based, community-driven air quality monitoring. Yeah, these slides are corrupted. Okay. Sorry, Dr. Hobson. I'm not sure what happened. And so when you think about these issues around air quality, what I wanted to show was Baltimore. So the Baltimore City, as I talked before, they have the Port of Baltimore, but they also have an incinerator. So one of the community groups we work with is called the South Baltimore Community Land Trust. And that community has been doing a lot of monitoring around the incinerator, but they also had a CXX coal pile explosion. So if you think about what happened in Ohio, there's other communities that are impacted by goods movement, rail traffic. And so they're impacted by multiple industrial hazards, multiple stationary hazards, and also mobile sources. So that's, again, you may have similar issues in this region. And so think about, again, how you can bring in community engagement to work with those populations. Additionally, one of the things that we do is we develop mapping tools and that allow community members to collect their own data. So I talked about PPGIS before, public participatory GIS. One of the tools that we developed for the state of Maryland is the park equity mapping tool. And so just looking at equity and access to parks. So think about using that kind of approach for screening communities that may need more trees or may need more green space in St. Louis, in the state of Missouri, around the region. We also, well, my slides are all out of order. We also have developed an app called My Block Counts that allows community members to collect data at the block level. And the idea is, remember I talked about salutagens and pathogens. How can you capture, count, and visualize salutagens and pathogens? So it's sort of like a 411. right? And they can use this information as part of the decision support tool to inform policy and interventions. So again, this is another way you can bring in community science and use community engagement. And one of the other tools that we developed is called our Maryland EJ Screen tool. And that tool is very similar. You may know about US EPA EJ Screen. You may have heard about Cal Environmental Screen. You may have heard of CEQ's Climate and Economic Justice Screen tool. And that tool is a tool that we can use to really visualize communities. These tools at the federal level and the state level are tools that we can use to visualize communities that have environmental justice concerns. And then it allows you to identify those communities, allows you to prioritize those communities, and allows you to micro-target them with investments and resources and interventions, okay? I think, Dr. Hobson, I'm gonna stop there because I have a confused look on my face because I think my slides got really corrupted. I'm not sure what happened, but I will end there. Thank you. You can take questions. Oh, say it again, please. Oh, you're fine.
So the question is, how was the research in North Carolina translated to the installation of pipes? Was it through policy change?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. So part of what they did, we took the data, they actually submitted an administrative complaint about the lack of sewer and water infrastructure. They called it the lack of basic amenities as a EJ issue. So they're the first community group in the country to submit an administrative complaint to the Department of Justice to say that not having sewer and water infrastructure was an EJ issue. So they leveraged Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. So that's part of what they did. And additionally, since they were able to access community development block grants as a way to put in the new roads and put in the new pipes. Other questions? I do not. I am an insomniac. I'm actually asleep right now. No, I have very poor work-life balance. And as I joke with my students and staff, like Charles Barkley said in the day, I am not your role model. So it's very difficult to unplug. But one of the things I do, I know we don't have a lot of time. One of the ways I try to, get to homeostasis for myself and get to balance, I garden a lot. So others have already heard about my micro farm at my house. I'll say this real quickly. I have an in-ground garden. Actually, I have more than that. I have a full house garden, but in-ground garden, just had the beds rebuilt. And I now have a beautiful 15-foot tall, 10-foot long hoop trellis with blackberries growing. So this summer, I'll be doing my country boy thing and picking blackberries. So for me, gardening is a really important way for me to unplug. But other than that, I am connected to the matrix too often. Yes. Thanks for that question.
Just in time.
And that's an encouraging question and point for everyone to meditate and find ways to unplug, because many EJ advocates, to be serious about it, many of my colleagues have died young because of all the stress of doing this work, right? And not just because of the work that we do, but some of the folks are coming from the communities too. So they live in the communities and they're stressed by fighting for change. So it's important for us to unplug and find ways to get that balance. So thank you for that question.
Thank you so much for coming to speak today. I'm an MPH student here at WashU. I'm curious about how you, as a community advocate for a lot of these environmental racism issues, kind of combat the cynicism that I guess is part and parcel with conversations about global warming, kind of addressing the I guess the full scope of issues that that introduces as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had a conversation about, some people are climate deniers, they have cynicism about it. So I think you gotta, as I mentioned in a slide that did show well, the food, faith, family, health, and job slide connected to things that are important to people. And so when you talk about climate change, some people may turn off, but talk about extreme weather. Was your family safe during the tornadoes? What are you doing for preparedness, right? I mean, the heat waves, I mean, y'all may have heat waves there, how are you dealing with the heat waves? Know your audience and say things that don't trigger them, but say things that connect and build bridges. So I think showing our shared humanity, and that's that slide I showed with the photo, I am a man, our humanity, our shared humanity, focus on our shared humanity and things that are important for all of us. And that's why I've said, at least in most cases, maybe two of three of the things when I list: food, faith, family, health, and jobs. Maybe not all five of those things, but that's the way to make a connection and start the conversation and not put people when they're in the trigger mode and they're gonna, be cynical or not listen. And so the message and the message are important, but things that are, again, proximal, everyday pocketbook, that impact our family, that's the place to start.
All right, we have just a couple more minutes, maybe one more question. So pass.
What does it matter? Hi, thank you for coming. I'm also a first-year MPH student. My name is Brianna. I kind of connected really well with your presentation. So my dad was from Mississippi, so half of my family's from Mississippi.
We're from
And Noxubee County, very south. Yeah, so it's probably Jackson is like kind of like the big city that compares to Noxubee. So
yeah.
talking about Noxubee, they still have dirt roads.
Mhm.
So there's like no highways. There's no like restaurants or anything like that. I think the closest Walmart is like 60 miles away.
Mhm.
And so my family was super excited when they first got like their first restaurant. And guess what it was? McDonald's. But no, since like talking about Mississippi, and you touched on Jim Crow, and like they're like now talking about Jim Crow 2.0.
Yep.
How, like, moving forward, how will the marginalized groups get their voice heard? Or like, what do you see coming the next?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was in Jackson a few weeks ago for family stuff, not for the Jackson water crisis, but I actually experienced it firsthand because we were in Jackson proper. So there is a young lady there. Her name is Ramona. I'm forgetting Ramona's last name, but she has a group, Mississippi MCUP. The P is prosperity. So she's trying to build an EJ movement in Mississippi. So she had a conference while I was in Jackson, but I wasn't able to attend the day of the conference. So, but she was actually at the event I was at in St. Simon's Island, Georgia, this past weekend. I was in Georgia this past weekend, and I met her. So she would be a person who is trying to build that movement in Mississippi. There's also another group called Mississippi Jesus People for Environmental Justice. Just another group. So there are a few groups there. But when you think about the maturity of the state level EJ movement across the South, North Carolina's movement is very mature. Mississippi's movement it needs more support. So people like you and your family, folks like me, we have to bring our skills and resources and be good allies to help folks who have been marginalized and who are still being marginalized as it relates to the Jackson water crisis and some of the other crises that we have in Mississippi. But I think engaging with the faith infrastructure, which is a big part of, Mississippi, right? And engaging with these, the few EJ groups that we have, I think that's a place to start.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to be going to Mississippi.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for coming here today. And let's give Dr. Wilson one last round of applause and thanks for being here. Really appreciate your time and your expertise and all the knowledge that you shared with us. And I want to say thank you one last time to WashU Climate Change Program and Environmental Studies and Here and Next for co-sponsoring this with us. And I want to wish all of you here in the audience and online a lovely rest of the day. And thank you so much for being here. Bye.
Thank you.